Perci is a young lad filled with energy who lives with his grandpa on a huge, hilly structure known as the Finger. He enjoys his life of solitude alongside his grandpa as they hunt, train, and eat together. But one day his entire life changes when an armored knight arrives at their tower and kills his grandfather before leaving Perci to die alongside him. Perci survives and vows to take revenge before leaving the tower and starting a dangerous adventure. Perci runs along the vast stretches of his home as he spots a giant monster bird flying in the sky. He rushes up to a cliff's side before spotting his grandfather, who is tending to crops, and asks him to quickly hunt the bird, as they don't usually find them at this height. His grandpa is also shocked by it, but immediately finds his rake and throws it towards the bird at an incredible speed, impaling it in the chest. As it starts falling down to the ground, Perci has a massive brain fart and for no reason jumps on top of the bird, grabbing its neck, and almost falls off the tower, while his grandpa runs behind him only to find him clinging onto a piece of rock while holding the bird. They go back to their little cottage and Perci gets a sword before slicing and dressing the bird with surprising ease, as the sword looks twice as big as him. His grandpa commends his skills and they both roast the bird before sitting down to have a hearty dinner together, savoring every bite of this huge, idiotic-looking chicken before going off to bed. The next morning, both shirtless and ready for training, Perci charges at his grandpa, who's jacked up on multiple doses of Tren. Grandpa swiftly blocks Perci's path with a massive fist. Perci, quick on his feet, rotates to the side and rushes again at an angle, surprising his grandpa with a strong hit to the stomach that pushes him back. Perci realizes he can't feel the ground, while his grandpa flexes, lifting him into the air and playfully tossing him aside. Perci on the ground throws a temper tantrum about never being able to defeat his grandpa. The massive figure reassures him that he had to use a bit of real strength this time, leaving Perci happy about his little victory. Meanwhile, the muscle-bound grandpa heads to a beautiful cave, mentally reflecting on Perci's rapid growth. Sitting by a stream, he absent-mindedly fingers a bowl, only to recall that it'll be Perci's birthday tomorrow. In a hurry, he rushes out of the cave, climbs the cliff, and returns home. Unable to find Perci inside, he goes behind the house and spots him taking a leak. Grandpa excitedly screams about tomorrow being Perci's birthday, only to be met with nonchalance. Perci, unfazed mid-leak, casually asks how old he'll be tomorrow. Grandpa tells Perci that he'll turn 16 tomorrow, marking his transition into adulthood in this world. Perci, still mid-piss, excitedly asks if this means he can now drink with his grandpa. However, Grandpa informs him that even in this medieval world, there's a higher age for alcohol consumption than in the UK. Undeterred, Perci, probably still pissing everywhere, inquires about a birthday gift. Grandpa instructs him to follow and leads the way, climbing a cliff. Upon reaching the top of the cliff, Grandpa stands overlooking the vast sky filled with clouds and suggests to Perci the idea of leaving the Fingers and embarking on a journey around the world to witness its wonders. Perci, with a nonchalant smile, declares he couldn't care less about the world, shocking his grandpa. The older man finds this hard to believe, recounting his own adventurous youth when he left home at 16 to become a real man. Perci retorts that every day at the Fingers is an adventure for him, and he's content with the place. Grandpa points to the open sky, mentioning a small island where sky people, a breed of humans, supposedly live. This island, created by the holy goddesses, floats in the sky, concealing its wonders from the world below. Perci questions why Grandpa himself has never gone there, but he replies that he can't fly, but has had his fun with the adventures and mysteries present in Britannia, the vast continent below the clouds where their tower stands. Excited by Grandpa's stories of snake-like towers, sky-sailing knights, a cave to hell, an enchanted lake, and a magical forest, Perci, not looking too interested, gets ready to catch some cool fish. Later, in their cozy cottage, the delicious smell of roasted fish fills the air as Perci enjoys his meal. Grandpa, acting a bit like a Monday morning Russian, shares stories about Perci's dad starting adventures at 16 and curious about his dad. Perci asks for more information, but Grandpa changes the topic immediately and asks if Perci ever feels lonely. Perci replies swiftly, claiming that he doesn't feel lonely at all as he always has his grandpa around. Grandpa gets a little flustered and changes the subject again. Perci, sitting by the warm fire and carving wood, casually suggests they go hunt big rocky lizards the next day. Perci's grandpa, quite drunk, starts muttering familiar quotes, claiming it's just a reminder for himself. He gigs at Perci, asking about his plans when he grows up. Perci grins, expressing his determination to become strong, protect the weak, and be willing to sacrifice anything to protect his family. Grandpa, pleased with the response, laughs and playfully challenges Perci, saying he's not that old and doesn't need protection from a small guy like him. As midnight arrives, both Perci and his grandpa collapse on the bed, seemingly asleep. However, Perci is wide awake, sneaks out, and sits at the edge of the cliff, gazing at the full moon and the cloud-filled sky. Excited about the adventures awaiting him in Britannia, he starts jumping around to release his energy, running several laps until a jutting rock sends him tumbling down the hill, face first into the ground. Reality hits Perci, realizing he can't simply leave for Britannia because he doesn't want to leave his grandpa alone. Saddened by this, he falls asleep and dreams of his grandpa standing in the distance, unable to hear him no matter how close he gets. Suddenly, he wakes up on the ground surrounded by mist. Rubbing his eyes, Perci hears a sound and sees a man in bright red armor approaching on a flying boat. Shocked, he watches as the knight, clad in red, parks the boat at the tower's edge and lands on the ground. The knight expresses surprise that his scouting bird died in this area. Overjoyed to encounter the knight with the phantom boat, Perci eagerly questions if he's the one who sails across the sky. The knight, seemingly friendly, greets Perci and inquires if he lives here with someone. Perci happily responds that he lives with his grandpa. Curious about the knight's identity, Perci learns he is an old friend of his grandpa from their days as holy knights. The knight reveals he has urgent business with Perci's grandpa and asks about his whereabouts. Excitedly, Perci points beyond the hill, claiming his grandpa is preparing breakfast. He asks the knight whether he can hop on the boat to have a look. The knight agrees, and as Perci watches him walk towards the cottage, he senses a sudden malicious vibe, sending a shiver down his spine. Dismissing it as imagination, Perci turns his attention to the boat, admiring and attempting to ride it. However, realizing he can't move it, he wonders if it's because he's not a holy knight. He starts thinking, what is a holy knight exactly, as his grandpa never explained it to him. Suddenly, a sense of fear grips him as he recalls the weird feeling he got from the knight. Immediately, he gets off the boat and sprints towards the cottage, feeling that something is wrong and that his grandpa might be in danger. Meanwhile, his grandpa was chopping up some veggies for the breakfast when he hears footsteps behind him that scare him, and he immediately takes a defensive stance, blocking an incoming attack from the knight, but still is blasted into the house. His grandpa gets up and rushes towards the knight with his sword in hand and engages in a clash resulting in multiple sword slashes, but all of them are blocked by the knight with extreme ease, who then uses his magic and creates a slash through the grandfather, which even hits the house behind him. Bleeding from his body and mouth, the grandfather stands his ground when they hear Perci shout from the cliff, who tells the knight to piss off and stop hurting his grandpa. The knight immediately retaliates with an aerial slash that slices a massive chunk of the cliff and tells Perci to shut his ass or else he's going to be next. Perci gets pissed and grabs a rock before jumping down and throws it at the knight, who immediately destroys it with magic. Perci descends down and grabs an even bigger boulder before hurling it towards the crimson armored man, but it is of no use as he simply uses his aerial slash to slice it into multiple pieces and was about to hit him as well, when Grandpa goes into roid rage and grabs the knight, telling Perci to run away, and while Perci shouts that he won't leave without him. The knight tells them to shut up as they both will die before using his magical slash on the grandpa, who falls to the ground bleeding all over and has so many holes that not even flex tape can save this man's life. While Perci didn't even process what happened, the knight turns towards him and uses his magic to deliver a massive slash at him as well that even cuts through the mountain behind him. Perci starts bleeding and was about to fall, but regains his balance before moving towards the knight and tries to punch, but in his weakened state doesn't do anything and the knight kicks him away. His grandfather asks the knight why did he come here to kill them, and the knight claims that there was a prophecy a couple days ago that 4 knights that are currently in this world will band together and cause the downfall of King Arthur. Because they can't take any chances, they are forced to kill anyone who has not declared their loyalty to the crown. He claims that the details are not clear, but they have been given the order to act on their own. His grandpa asks whether he has any conscience as he just killed a small boy, but the knight tells him that it's all for the greater good and walks off. His grandpa tries to sit up and notices Perci still alive as he walks towards his grandfather slowly and painfully. He apologizes for not being able to protect him and for being so powerless, while his grandpa tells him that it is his job to protect the young ones, and not the other way around. They hug and cries on his shoulders, apologizing profusely, while the grandfather comforts him and falls to the ground. He tells Perci to listen carefully and explains that the knight that he just saw was none other than his own father, who is known as Ironside. He can't explain the entire situation because there is not much time left for him, but tells Perci to find the knight as he is the one who can explain everything to him. He puts his hand on Perci's head one last time and tells him that he will always be watching over him before falling to the ground dead. Perci sleeps in his destroyed house and the next morning digs a grave to bury his grandfather before picking out some turnips in the garden and sits down to have some dinner all alone. The next few days he spends looking through their destroyed belongings when he finds a small chest which contains a robe and some other pieces of clothing alongside a note by his grandpa. He realizes that his grandpa worked on these clothes so that he can gift it on his birthday when Perci is ready for adventure. Several days pass by, and after grieving for his grandpa, he finally decides to move on and wears his grandpa's helmet on his head and takes whatever he needs before moving on with his journey as he's finally ready to face the world. He starts descending the tower, and even after climbing down for a whole day, he is still unable to see anything but clouds. He sleeps on a ledge that night, and the next morning he begins his journey once again. This time he's finally able to spot the ground, and with that, he also is able to see the kingdom at a distance, but in his happiness, he ends up falling off the ledge. Fortune seems to be on his side as he ends up on a bird's back, but he promises to become a vegan from now on. The bird still kicks him off, and he falls face first into a bunch of trees and then slams on the ground. He is still happy that he at least made it all the way down when he hears someone coming and notices one of the ugliest cat-dog Alabama abomination that I have ever seen. Perci is amazed at the sight of this creature and tries to talk to it, as he has never seen anything like this before on the rock that he used to live on. For several minutes, he tries to get information out of the creature, asking him whether he knows anywhere he can find humans like him as he is new here. The dog simply turns his head and starts walking away from him, but even after being completely ignored, Perci keeps following the dog, which creeps it out, and it starts running away at full speed, still being pursued by the weird helmet-wielding boy. The dog picks up even more speed and jumps through the forest and disappears, leaving Perci all alone. Perci still tries to follow and finds his way through some bushes when he finally spots some humans sitting by a cart. The group of 3 friends seem to be performers and are practicing their daily routine as the fatty named Cats shows his hands that are filled with scraps of paper and throws it up in the air. The scraps immediately catch fire and fall down to the ground, while his female companion called Elva shows her own magic tricks with her monkey by using a hoop. As soon as she puts the hoop through her hand, the monkey disappears but appears after the hoop is removed just as mysteriously. He then finally turns towards their final companion called Dunny, but notices that he is not even taking it seriously and is just chilling out on the horse cart. Fatty tells Dunny to take this seriously, but he replies that there is no one here to see their show, so why should he waste his energy when they are not going to get anything out of it? Elva tells him that they can only practice when no one is around, but Dunny replies that he doesn't need to practice in order to perform, unlike me who can't perform at night no matter how much I practice with my hand. Suddenly, they hear the voice of someone clapping and turn around to see an amazed-looking Perci clapping at their act as he was truly intrigued by their magical performance. They all walk up to him while he dances around, telling them that what they did was super cool and he wants to see it once again as he has never seen anything like this before. Both Elva and Fatty think that this boy is from somewhere else, but Dunny wouldn't leave any opportunity to make money and walks up to him, demanding money as he has seen their act, which is not free. Elva protests against it, but Dunny says that they need to buy food, and for that they need money. Perci, on the other hand, has no idea what money is and how it works, which pisses Dunny off, but he tells Perci that if he doesn't have any money, then he will need to pay for it with his belongings, and a knave Perci simply hands up his bag filled with all the necessary items that he needed over to Donnie. Donnie takes out a dagger and claims that he will complete the show, and soon enough Perci starts floating up in the air. He is completely bewildered at it, but is super happy to be able to do something like this, and asks Dunny how he can do this. But to his surprise, Dunny and his peers have left him hanging up in the air and taken off with his belongings on their horse cart. Dunny seems to be happy with himself, while Elva tells him how much of a shithead he is. Dunny retorts by saying that everyone needs to know how to deal with the real world, and that he has just given him the taste, but Elva still hounds him, saying that the boys seem to be alone and completely unaware of how the world works. Donnie starts feeling a little bad and thinks whether he should stop and turn back to return Perci's belongings back, but before he could even make the decision, Perci immediately runs up to their cart with such an incredible speed that it shocks every single one of them. Donnie immediately hands him his bag, but to his surprise, instead of being angry, Perci simply asks them how he can find someone in this world. They have no idea who he is talking about and ask him who he wants to meet. Perci gets a little silent and answers that he wants to find a person called Ironside. When they ask who this Ironside guy is, Perci's mood darkens and he remembers the things that happened in his past, including how the knight who is supposed to be his own father mercilessly killed his grandpa, and then even tried to kill Perci, who is supposed to be his only son. Fatty feels bad for him and asks whether he is out on a quest for revenge, but Perci replies that he himself doesn't have any idea why is he trying to follow this man, but claims that his grandpa told him before dying that Ironside holds the answer to all his questions. Both Fatty and Elva tell him that unfortunately none of them have heard anyone by that name, but Fatty tells him that if he goes to the nearby villages he can probably gather some information that they don't have. Perci doesn't seem to understand what a village is, but suddenly remembers his grandpa telling him that villages are the place where a lot of people live together in harmony. Fatty even extends a helping hand and tells him that they can take him to the nearby village. Donnie stops him though and asks how will he pay them back for it, but he has no idea, so Donnie asks whether he can perform any kind of acts, and soon enough he gives him a bow and arrow. Percy gets ready with it and aims it at the apple kept on a wooden beam, but to everyone's surprise, his arrow somehow comes out the other direction and almost unlives Donnie instead. After that, they all start moving on the cart, while Fatty tells him that he doesn't need to worry as they will take him to the nearby village for free. He further explains that they are a troupe of performers who roam around the continent and do shows in cities and villages to earn money in order to survive. This seems to really mesmerize Percy, but Donnie butts in saying that it is nothing to be proud of as they are only a bunch of failed holy knights who didn't have enough magic or abilities to become someone that actually matters. Fatty smiles sadly and tells Percy that they have gone through a lot of shit together and were supposed to become holy knights, but their hopes and dreams were crushed, and ever since they are simply performing as circus men. Suddenly, they are approached by some villagers who are screaming for help, saying that a wolf is currently on a rampage in their village and that they should run to seek the help of the holy knights. However, Percy doesn't know what a wolf is, so he asks for an explanation. Donnie chuckles and mocks them, saying there was no need to call the holy knights because they could easily drive the wolf away. Immediately, he grabs the reins of the horse and charges towards the village, although Fatty doesn't support the decision, but Donnie explains that this could be an opportunity for them to get free food and accommodation from the village. To their greatest surprise, the wolf is no ordinary one, but a humongous beast large enough to tower over the houses of the villagers. Immediately, Donnie charges in the opposite direction and decides it is a good idea to call the Holy Knights. Elva tells Donnie that they cannot abandon the villagers, and Percy immediately jumps out of the cart, heading straight towards the wolf, remembering his grandfather's words to defeat evil and protect the weak. Percy aims at the wolf with his terrible archery skills, but the arrows land on his helmet, giving the wolf an opening to attack, but Donnie comes in clutch at the last moment and saved him by taking the attack head-on. Seeing Donnie injured, Percy wonders why Donnie risked his life to save him, so Donnie tells him that he found motivation after seeing Percy charge bravely. As the wolf starts moving towards Percy again, he manages to stop it with just the palm of his hands. After that, he jumps into the air and slaps the wolf, immediately ramming it into the ground and killing it on the spot. The villagers are amazed by the size of the wolf, calling it a bad omen and wondering what it could mean for them. Meanwhile, Fatty wraps a bandage around Donnie, who is in a lot of pain. Donnie says he shouldn't worry about him and wonders where Percy is. Apparently, Elva took him to the hillside lake for a bath. Seeing the wounds from his unfortunate encounter with Ironside, she feels sorry for him, and while he's lost in thought, she pours water over his head to properly clean him up in preparation for a welcome party organized by the villagers. When he asks Elva about Holy Knights, she was on to mumble the same chant his grandfather used to mumble repeatedly. He also asked about magic, and Elva explains that they displayed it to him earlier, although theirs wasn't strong enough to make them Holy Knights. She, however, tells him that his bravery and selflessness are good qualities of a Holy Knight. At the party, Percy is sipping on tasty berry juice and starts thinking about why Donnie can have alcohol. Elva chimes in, saying Donnie likes pretending to be all grown up even though they're both just 16. But when Percy reveals he's also 16, both Donnie and Elva are totally surprised. Elva especially feels super awkward, realizing she got fooled by Percy looking younger and even shared a lake bath with him. Interrupting them, a young boy runs up to Percy and thanks him for rescuing him and his grandfather. Later, Percy goes around asking the villagers for the whereabouts of Ironside, but he only gets disappointed and frustrated to the point that he yells out for Ironside to show his face. Suddenly, a black meg appears in the sky and says he recognizes Ironside. As the knight boldly approaches, he says he can't believe that Percy is alive because Ironside was supposed to have destroyed both Percy and his grandfather. He then concludes that Ironside probably has a soft spot for his son. Triggered by the knight's lack of sympathy, Fatty steps in and tells him to apologize to Percy because he lost his grandfather only recently. The knight knocked him out with one gentle push, saying he had no business with him. The Dark Knight named Peligard introduces himself, claiming to have known Percy's father and grandfather. In response, Percy boldly demands to know where Ironside is. The knight is taken aback by Percy's courage as he counts down, waiting for an answer. Villagers scatter in fear as a skirmish breaks out between the two and the little boy from earlier cheers for Percy. Charging at the Black Knight, Percy leaps and delivers a strong kick to the knight's chest, surprising Peligard. Despite not having a visible weapon, Percy's powerful kick manages to push the knight back. Undeterred, Percy continues throwing punches in midair, insisting that if he emerges victorious, Peligard must reveal the whereabouts of his father. However, Pelagard swiftly counters with a punch that sends Perci crashing to the ground. With confidence, Pelagard declares that if he wins, Perci must follow him. Perci lifts himself off the ground with great speed and powerful momentum, but Pelagard uses his weapon to trap him midair. Still, the teenager is able to maneuver his way out of the trap and rapidly kicks at Pelagard's armor. Eventually, Pelagard grabs Perci by his head as he covers his entire face with his large palms. This leaves the poor boy suspended in the air while he struggles to free himself from the knight's grasp. Pelagard uses this advantage to deliver a speech about his admiration for Perci's bravery and unfaltering desire to rescue people. Still, he is uncomfortable fighting about with no weapons, so he tells Perci to use his magical powers to save himself, but the boy tells him that he possesses none. Pelagard is shocked that the son of Ironside has no magic, so he agrees that he might have overestimated the boy, yet Perci was still worthy of being trained. To end it all, Pelagard continues to punch Perci mercilessly. Donnie can no longer stand to watch Perci almost getting killed, so he draws out his sword, but Elva warns him to stay away given Pelagard's exceptional strength. The little boy comes out to affirm his stance on the fight, saying that Perci won't lose because he was the hero who saved the boy and his grandfather. Just when all hope seems lost, a powerful beam of light shines from Perci's eyes, pushing Pelagard backwards with great force and speed and surprising both him and the Black Knight. The Dark Knight reminds Perci that he claimed no magical powers. However, it's hard to believe because Perci's hands are now radiating a strong and mysterious energy that could only be explained by magic. Perci is deeply shocked and goes into a manic episode trying to remove the aura flowing from his hands. He runs towards Pelagard to help him take the gross thing out, but the power from the outflowing aura throws the Black Knight. Seeing this, Donnie advises Perci he use that power to defeat the Black Knight, as that is most likely his magical power. Pelagard manages to stand up and wonders what kind of magic Perci has just used on him. It could have been the destruction type magic, but since it was overflowing from his fists, it could be the incantation type as well. Perci makes a bit of a silly move by asking Pelagard if he can use magic in this fight, as earlier he told the knight that he had no magic and he doesn't want to win by treachery. Surprisingly, Pelagard is impressed by Perci's honesty and gives him the green light to use magic. Perci is grateful and starts celebrating the fact that he can now use magic. However, his friend Donnie advises him to stop thanking his enemies every time. Determined to win, Perci tells the knight that he'll finally get information about his father's whereabouts, but Pelagard isn't willing to give him an easy win. He charges violently towards him, wielding a fireball coming out of his weapon. But before Perci can even register what is happening, the simple fireball becomes a flaming spiral, putting him in a difficult position as he tries to evade the attacks. Pelagard taunts him, claiming that there is no way he can fight if he only keeps dodging, but Perci surprises him by appearing behind him. The Black Knight immediately launches another attack, but Perci concentrates his magic by clasping both hands and blocks it, but the flames from the attack disperse and encircle him in a ball of fire. Pelagard then tells him that his flames usually burn the victims to ashes and that they will never extinguish until he cancels the spell. He tells Perci just to surrender and save himself from destruction, and even Elva advises him to surrender or else he loses everything, including his life. But the determined teenager refuses and coats himself with magic from within his body. This is both shocking and impressive to Pelagard given that Perci only discovered this magical power some moments ago. Out of nowhere, a small magical creature appears and holds down Pelagard's arms, undoing the spell. Pelagard is taken aback, wondering how Perci knew that dropping his hands would reverse the magic. Even more surprising is that Perci's wounds immediately begin to heal. As everyone watches in shock, the Black Knight tries to figure out what exact form of magic Perci was using because it was neither the destruction type, the incantation type, the degeneration type, nor the healing type. This makes him come to the conclusion that Perci possesses the hero type of magic, which would make him a target for all sorts of enemies and that should be avoided at all cost. While he's still deep in thought, Perci launches a surprise attack, much to the bewilderment of the villagers, who now have a renewed sense of hope in his ability to defeat Pelagard. At that instant, Pelagard breaks free from the hold of the magical creatures with such tremendous power that it makes Donnie realize that the knight had not even used half of his power. The knight calls Perci a rookie and starts approaching him, but Donnie sees that this could spell doom for Perci. So he gets into the battleground and uses his magic to suspend Pelagard in the air, while he tells Perci to make a run for it. Perci argues that he still has to find his father, and while the argument goes on, Pelagard causes a massive explosion that extends beyond the battlefield, making the villagers run as they fear that the village might get burnt down. Unfortunately, Donnie takes the most hit from the attack, but Pelagard says it serves him right for interfering in a fight between two proper men. Just then, the red fox from earlier brings Percy's belongings to him while Pelagard attempts to shoo it away. The fox rapidly spins its tail, revealing an orb that explodes, revealing a bright light. Immediately, Percy and his friends disappear, leaving the knight behind. They appear on a dragon's spine miles away from the village. They then become concerned about the villagers and head back quickly, but they are taken aback when the fox speaks. It calls them idiots because Pelagard's only target is the both of them, and he has no business with the rest of the villagers. The fox urges Percy to follow him, promising to explain everything later as it's related to Percy's father. Dunny warns Percy not to trust the fox, but in response, the fox reveals that Pelagard serves an evil king and is part of a group targeting the four knights of the apocalypse. Surprisingly, it explains that although the four knights don't exist, they will soon emerge. The fox discloses the names of the four knights as famine, pestilence, war, and death, holy knights destined to bring about four calamities and destroy the world. Shockingly, the fox reveals that Percy is one of these knights. Later, the knights of the evil king discuss their findings about the four knights. It turns out that the four knights are not holy knights but young boys who serve as apprentices to holy knights. The collected information reveals that one of the boys possesses a golden magical power. Another possesses evil and holiness in his eyes. The third is mysteriously big with an ever-changing appearance, and the last is a boy with green feather-like hair. At this point, Ironside bangs the table, realizing that his son is one of the four knights, and he regrets failing to double-check that Percy was dead. He is joined by Pelagard, who expresses his disbelief at Ironside's failure to dispose of Percy. Ironside asks why Pelagard didn't kill Percy. Pelagard explains that wasting Percy's power would be foolish, and that they could instead exploit that young boy's power and turn him into an ally. Hearing this, the Red Knight pulls out his sword as he reminds Pelagard that Percy is not only dangerous to the king, but to the entire world. And to this effect, Pelagard should perform diligently his duties as a royal knight. Back on the dragon's spine, Percy refuses to accept that he is going to destroy the world, but the fox explains that the prophecy is always accurate and tells him to follow him obediently. Percy still has his reservations, but the fox tells him that his father and Pelagard are in a city called Camelot. Hearing this, Dunny warns Percy not to believe the fox, because Camelot was destroyed years ago by the demon king, and that king went into hiding with some of his loyal knights. The fox still maintains that Camelot still exists but cannot be accessed via ordinary roads, except through Lion's Kingdom. Ignoring Dunny's warnings, Percy becomes excited and agrees to follow the fox, who introduces himself as Sin. Donnie gives in, agreeing to follow them to Lion's Kingdom. When they get to the end of the dragon's spine, Percy's stomach rumbles loudly. He suggests that compete to see who hunts down the largest prey. Donnie decides to level the playing field by collecting Percy's bow and arrow. After setting out, Percy ends up at a gorge and becomes thrilled at the echoes of his voice and realizes that this is a really good hunting spot. Some tiny winged creatures are seen marveling at the appearance of a human. On his own end, Donnie struggles to land a single prey and is mocked by Sin. He, however, says that he is still a much better archer than Percy. He immediately spots a deer and seizes the opportunity to get hunted down, but the arrow misses the deer and they hear a voice screaming. Realizing that he might have mistakenly hit someone, they both run towards the direction of the sound only to find a giant nun. Percy apologizes for hitting her and she returns the apology, saying that she was praying and only got startled by the arrow. While they are talking, the two winged creatures report that a human was spotted at the Echo Gorge. Knowing who they were talking about, Dunny asks if there is a problem, so they tell him the story behind the Echo Gorge. It was once a beautiful and lively place, but has now become a nightmare. Percy is seen having fun as he fights the monsters attacking him, and rejoices at the thought of his victory over Dunny in the hunting game. He is drawn towards a cry for help coming from within the forest. He walks towards the direction of the cries and finds a mushroom house. When he opens the door, he sees a creature tied to a post pleading for its life and a young boy in a toffet standing over it. As he runs to untie the creature, the young boy trips him and he hits his head. When he finally releases the creature, it flies out through the window and Percy wonders if it is a fairy. While he is carried away by his excitement, he suddenly loses consciousness. Donnie and the others are seen running to the gorge. The winged creatures explain that a demon living there had made all the creatures in the gorge become violent using some medicines. They described him as a mad herbalist called Nations. As they approach the gorge, they wonder if they're already too late, because if Nations has already captured Percy, the rescue will be useless, and their efforts will be wasted. Sin expresses the need to find Percy, because his head will roll should anything happen to the kid. The winged creatures stress the need to hurry, because Nations is as terrifying as they described him to be, because they've witnessed him transform harmless creatures into violent monsters. When Percy wakes up from his nap, he finds himself in a room that looks like a laboratory, with him undressed and tied to a chair. The first thing this guy looks for is his dumb helmet. Nations walks in, surprised to see his guinea pig already awake, given that he was supposed to be knocked out for another 10 hours. Perci asks for his clothes, his helmet, and his cloaks. So Nations explains that he usually keeps his guinea pigs clean, and because Perci's clothes were tattered, he was forced to get rid of them. He, however, shows him that his helmet and cloak are safe because they are rare items with powerful magical powers. Nations then walks over to Perci and injects something into him, a drug which was supposed to exert its effects within an hour. But within seconds, Perci's hair doubles in size, and he complains about how his helmet is ever going to fit again. Seeing this result, Nations is impressed and immediately falls in love with his newest test subject, who shows rapid response to treatment. Perci remembers seeing blood on Nations' lips, so he assumes that he bit the fairy, but Nations explains that he has a habit of biting his lips whenever he becomes excited. When Donnie and the others enter the gorge, they are chased by bloodthirsty monsters. Frustrated, Donnie blames this on Nations and calls him a formidable villain, but this annoys our giant nun and she throws a giant-sized tantrum, saying that Nations is not that bad a person. At the laboratory, Perci apologizes for misunderstanding Nations but says that he just has to leave. Nations tells him that he can only leave after the next experiment, which would need a mixture with precise measurements, and that if anything goes wrong with it, Perci would die. Wondering what the point is to all these experiments, Perci asks Nations for an explanation. Nations explains that he has a mission he absolutely needs to fulfill, but when he turns his head, Perci has set himself free and is dressed in his cloak as he tells Nations that he also has an important mission to fulfill. After telling him to put on his helmet, Perci becomes frustrated, and in that brief moment of distraction, Nations strikes in with two colorfully illuminated swords and emphasizes that he needs test subjects for his experiments and cannot use himself as a test subject because he has to save the gorge. While he is still explaining, Perci pops his helmet towards Nations, sending him crashing backwards into his work table, at the same time hurling the medicine towards Perci. At this point, Nations pleads with Perci to give him the bottle, but because Perci doesn't want Nations to use it on another test subject, he gulps down the entire contents of the bottle. Immediately, Perci falls down and Nations wonders why he drank the medicine. Perci begins to react in a troubling manner that makes Nations wonder if he accurately mixed the medicine, but when Perci stands up, he says he feels an extraordinary power surge throughout his whole body. He begins running around the lab and even runs outside to scream like an imbecile. Hearing the echo of his voice, Donnie and Sin are assured that he's okay, even though they don't stop running towards him. Nations meets Perci outside and asks why he took such a risk knowing he could have died, so Perci tells him that as long as he was trying to save the gorge, he was willing to assist him in any way. When Perci asks for the results of his experiments, Nations says it seems to be a perfect success, and immediately drinks up the remaining contents of the bottle. When the search team arrives, they surprisingly find Perci in perfect condition, except for his terrible hair, while Nations lay semi-conscious, muttering the name Ordo, which belonged to an old apothecary that once lived in the gorge. Ordo was a good-natured man who cared for all the creatures in the land, welcoming Ask into his home and tending to them when they were sick. One day he found a baby in a basket and raised him in his home, imparting upon him the knowledge of all forms of medicines. One fateful day, Ordo vanished from the gorge, never to be seen again. It was then that Nations began all of his crazy experiments. Meanwhile, in another part of the forest, the fairy that Perci rescued earlier is seen saying that it is time for the forest to be destroyed, and as a human hand appears from a mysterious aura, the fairy addresses it as Ordo. After a while, Nations finally struggles up to his feet and says that he urgently needs to spread the drug to the entire gorge before it completely decomposes. Unexpectedly, the fairy throws a rock at his face, saying that he wants to completely destroy the gorge. Other fairies join in, calling him a demon who was responsible for Ordo's sudden disappearance. They ignore the pleas of the nun, who proclaims Nations as innocent, eventually stopping when Perci steps in to block the rocks from coming in. Perci clarifies that Nations was truly preparing a drug to save the gorge, but while he's still speaking, purple fumes begin to cover the entire forest, killing every living thing they come across. Nations comes to the rescue when he magically creates the drug from nothing and explains that when he ingests any drug, he teaches his body how to recreate it without external ingredients. This was his own magical power, one he called mixed venom. Gradually, the size of the drug increases and Nations instructs everyone to cover their mouths. With one command, the drug disperses to the entire forest in form of a mist, one which gives life to every living thing in the gorge. They all watch in amazement as the forest revitalizes itself, all thanks to the crazy scientist Nations. Seeing this, Perci wonders why Nations referred to this drug as poison, and Nations illustrates that every poisonous thing can be used to heal and give life when studied well and mixed accurately, in the right proportion. This was taught to him by Ordo, whom he called his grandfather, and whom he dearly missed as he wished to meet him again. Perci wishes him luck and hopes that Nations will find his grandfather again. Later, the nun gives Perci some of Nations' childhood clothes, which fit him perfectly, given that he's only a couple centimeters long. The fairies later apologize for maltreating Nations because they thought he was deliberately causing the monsters to go gaga. However, Nations explains that the monsters going crazy was just a side effect of the drug. Now they wondered where those deadly fumes were coming from, and Nations says her only knows that it was after Ordo's disappearance that they started coming in, slowly draining the gorge of life and vibrancy. As Perci runs towards him, displaying his excitement about fitting in Nations' old clothes, Nations tells the fairies to quit apologizing to him and to thank Perci for serving as the sacrificial lamb that facilitated the successful creation of the drug. The Red Fox tells Nations that the deadly fumes do not only kill plants and animals, but seep into the ground as well, destroying the soil. Just then, they see a dysmorphic body coming out from the canyon above, and Donnie wonders if this could be a demon, until Nations says that it is his grandfather, Ordo. When Ordo comes down, Nations runs towards him, terrified and confused about why his grandfather looks that way, but the nun calmly prevents him from running into trouble, and Ordo vomits more of those deadly purple fumes, and the gorge begins to rot faster. Nations breaks loose from the nun and runs to ask Ordo why he's destroying the gorge which he once considered his home, but Ordo mutters something about crushing the gorge, and immediately picks Nations up and begins to squeeze the life out of him. Perci runs towards them to no avail, but the nun is able to squeeze his hand to let go of Nations. She also yells at Ordo for trying to destroy his own family, but he suddenly breathes out more of the poisonous fumes, which instantly kill her. Nations yells in agony, wondering why his sister was killed, when the fairy suddenly shows up and tells him to shut up. Shocked, Perci recognizes him as the fairy that he rescued from Nations. The fairy continues by saying that Nations was responsible for the tragedy because he was always getting in his way. The saddest fairy says that death is such a beautiful thing, and he wonders why Nations and Ordo are obsessed with preventing it from happening. The fairy then calls Ordo a sinner and commands him to atone for his sins and destroy the gorge, so Ordo immediately rushes towards Nations, but Perci quickly jumps in and punches Ordo on his jaw, making him stagger for a while. Seeing all this, Nations is overwhelmed with hopelessness and wonders what to do next, but Perci immediately hugs him tightly and assures him that they will both rescue Ordo together. This immediately brings tears to Nations' eyes. Confused about the next steps to take, Nations and Perci try to come up with a solution for Ordo's recovery. Sin tells them that they can easily overturn the situation by destroying the cause. The evil fairy then commands Ordo to destroy the gorge, but is abruptly shot by an arrow from nowhere and collapses to the ground, where he is flattened and is followed by Ordo, who also falls to the ground. This raises questions amongst the others who try to figure out where the arrow came from until they are interrupted by a voice from above. The Holy Knight in golden yellow armor rebukes them for destroying his toy and introduces himself as the Amber Knight, Talisker. Recognizing the similarity in appearance, Perci says that Talisker is surely another companion of Ironside. Nations tells the knight to turn his grandfather back to a human and demands to know his reason for transforming Ordo into a monster. So Talisker challenges him to fight, saying that if Nations is able to land a single blow on him, he will do his bidding. The Red Fox cautions them against succumbing to the knight's mockery, but Nations eagerly agrees to fight, summoning his magic as he brings out his magical blades, Henbane and Belladonna. Seeing that Nations can transfer his poison into objects, the knight wonders whether he possesses both enchanting and shifting types of magic. Perci offers to help Nations, who declines the offer by saying that this is a fight between magical creatures. To prove his magical abilities, Perci attempts to summon his powers but fails to, so he tries harder but ends up farting, much to the amusement of everyone. Nations appreciates him for his efforts before charging forth at Talisker. The knight then summons hail from the sky, creating a destructive hail impact. Perci's quick intervention rescues Nations again, but just before they can get back on their feet, Talisker orders Ordo to get rid of them. Ordo instantly swings at Nations, slamming him to the ground. Pleased with his performance, the knight orders Ordo to finish Nations off, but Perci intercepts the punch, telling Ordo not to blindly follow Talisker's orders. He reminds him that his grandson has been protecting the gorge for him, and as Ordo hears this, his eyes transform back to that of a human, with tears welling up in them. Talisker is fed up with all that emotional garbage and proceeds to send them all into the afterlife, so Sin loses hope and prepares himself for the inevitable. The Amber Knight summons the hail impact once more, and upon seeing this, Perci propels himself into the air using Ordo as support. He counters the harmful effects of the hailstorm by shattering the rocks into smaller pieces, eventually landing on his feet, with so much bruises on his body. Talisker watches in shock, assuming that Perci has gone nuts, while Donnie swoops in just in time to catch Perci before he collapses. Nations asks Perci why he made that insane move, but Perci tells Nations not to lose faith in him, promising that his grandfather will be normal again. Just when Talisker says he has had enough of the whole charade, Perci begins to glow to the amazement of everyone. His magic turns into a spiral beam of light that reaches up to the sky and splits into tiny magical creatures before merging into a big creature surrounding him. Talisker mocks Perci's powers, saying that he has never seen such unstructured magic. But Nations is both excited and bewildered, seeing how fast Perci has healed from the terrible injuries he sustained, and as Perci reassures him that he has truly recovered, Donnie and the Red Fox are astonished to see how much bigger and better his magic had become. In an attempt to pulverize Perci, Talisker summons a mighty hailstorm, but to his surprise, Perci's large magical creature swallows every piece of the hail impact and rapidly spits it back at Talisker, pushing him backwards as he tries to escape the storm. Perci walks towards the defeated knight, and just before he delivers a punch to Talisker, Perci reminds him to fulfill his promise to explain why he disfigured Ordo. Also, he tells Talisker to brace up for a good beating, because he must equally deliver his promise of turning Ordo back into a human. Pissed at Perci's guts, Talisker charges at him with his magical staff and attempts to hit him multiple times, but fails to land a single blow on Perci. When it's Perci's turn to land a blow, Talisker jeers at him, saying that he can't possibly hit him without a weapon. But Perci transforms his magical orb into a giant palm, slamming Talisker into the ground and holding him down, while he asks Talisker to explain his reason for disfiguring Ordo, who was nothing but a kind and generous man. Talisker answers, saying that Ordo committed a grave sin against his Lord Arthur by rescuing other races outside humans. He says that Lord Arthur wants a peaceful land for humans where other races do not exist to threaten their peace. Talisker continues, saying that after several failed attempts to warn Ordo about defying Lord Arthur, he punished him by transforming him into a hideous monster driven by an impulse to destroy and be a menace to the world. After turning him into a monster, Talisker ordered Ordo to destroy the gorge, otherwise he would have to do it himself. Following his confession, Talisker breaks free from Perci's grip, and after listening to his ridiculous excuses for his actions, Perci is furious as he states that Talisker toyed with Nasion's emotions for nothing. Unmoved by Perci's speech, Talisker tells him that his magical power is the ability to change the weather, so he summons lightning from the sky and calls it the Riot Piercer, but Perci's orb absorbs all the lightning. Unscathed by the attack, Perci angrily charges at him, telling Talisker that he has no idea how painful it is to lose one's grandfather for no justifiable reason. Talisker is shocked at how easily Perci transforms these Riot Pierces into his own magic, and asks himself just what sort of a human being Perci is. At that moment, he remembers the prophecy that was given about the 4 Knights of the Apocalypse, and now that he sees the green-haired boy, the knight is assured that Perci is one of the 4 Knights. To avoid Perci's strike, Talisker jumps backwards, thinking to himself how lucky he must be to face one of the 4 Knights of the Apocalypse. He imagines how fortunate it will be for the king if he can take out one of the knights that have been prophesied to threaten his life. As Talisker flies high into the air, Sin tells Perci that his magic forms whatever he thinks of, so he should imagine a weapon that would knock out Talisker. As a side note, Dunny warns him to imagine anything but an arrow, knowing how terrible a shot he is. Talisker summons a hailstorm shaped like a bird, which he calls Calamity Bird, and because Perci remembers how he defeated the rock bird on God's finger, he immediately slices the Calamity Bird after creating a sword with his magic. While Talisker expresses his astonishment at this, Perci throws his magical sword at him, which hits him in the chest and rams him into the mountain. In disbelief, Talisker curses at Perci and wonders just how powerful the 4 Knights of the Apocalypse must be. Seeing this, Dunny can't believe his eyes as Perci has blown away the Holy Knight with the entire mountain. Sin asks Perci to turn off his magic, since he has already conquered the Holy Knight, but the clueless fool had no idea how to go about it. As Sin expresses his disappointment, Donnie and Nasions are shocked to the core owing to the sudden appearance of the giant nun. Pleased to see his sister alive, Nasions asks if she's okay and becomes upset when Donnie calls her a giant zombie. Sin explains that she must have turned black owing to the presence of heavy metal in her genes. He says that the giant clan possesses the ability to shield themselves with heavy metal in the face of imminent danger. Slowly, she sheds the metal coating and returns to her normal self. She apologizes to Nasions for making him worried and tells him that she is now okay. Seeing that Ordo is still in his monster state, Nasions remembers his grandfather's dreams for the gorge. He intended to transform it into Britannia's medicine box for all kinds of creatures. Nasions breaks down crying and Perci apologizes for failing to fulfill his promise of turning Ordo back into a human. Miraculously, Sin spots Talisker's magical staff which he dropped when Perci sent him to the other end of the world. So he breaks it, undoing the spell that had turned Ordo into a monster. Before their very eyes, Ordo returns to his human form, filling everyone with shock. The siblings become emotional and Nations overflows with tears as he runs to hug his grandfather tightly, while Perci watches their happy reunion with a sense of accomplishment. After the happy reunion, Donnie mocks Nations for crying like a little girl, despite his strict and frank personality. Perci, however, defends him, saying that he was only excited to be reunited with his grandfather. When Donnie asks about the stick that turned Ordo into a monster, Sin explains that it is a chaos staff, a staff infused with chaotic force, which is handed down to the knights by the king of Camelot. Donnie again asks why the knights carry such a destructive staff around, but Sin gets tired and tells him to leave him alone and go ask the knight himself. Filled with a new resolve, Perci announces that he has now changed his course of plans. He was initially just going to deal with his father, to exact revenge for his grandfather's death, but he has now decided to woo the king of Camelot to stop him from subjecting anyone else to experiences that are similar to his. Sin commends his resolve, but tells him it's pronounced Camelot, not Cami, whatever Perci said. Perci remembers the hunting game and tells them about his conquests, but Donnie just wants them to forget all about it because he didn't land a single kill. To their surprise, Sin proclaims himself as the winner, showing them an ultramarine mutilator rabbit, which is one of the most valuable creatures. Sin reminds them that the winner gets to order the losers around and is about to give them his order, but Nations suddenly appears, saying that he wants to follow them because he owes Perci for helping him to rescue his grandpa and the Gorge. He also says that Ordo told him to explore the world and become better at creating medicines. Donnie is initially against the idea of having the weirdo on their team, but Sin uses his winner's advantage and orders him to support the idea. At the Gorge, the giant nun sheds tears of joy, pleased to see her brother with a look she had never seen on his face before, a look that showed that he had found his first friend.